She's the housekeeper, Calvin said, pointing at his wife at the front desk. The lobby went silent. His mistress stood beside him, smiling like she belonged there. Rochelle didn't react. One hand rested on the marble counter. The other held a sealed envelope. She looked at him the way a woman looks at a mistake already made. Because behind that front desk wall, someone was already watching, and Calvin had no idea who. The Harrington Grand was not the kind of hotel where people raised their voices. It was the kind of hotel where the floors were so clean they reflected the chandeliers above them, where the front desk staff wore small gold pins on their lapels and had been trained to make every guest feel as though they had been personally expected. The lobby smelled like cedar and something floral, white flowers, expensive, the kind of scent that costs money just to maintain and serves no purpose except to signal that money has been spent. On a Friday evening, the space filled naturally, the way a good lobby does. Couples with soft leather luggage, two men in suits reviewing something on a tablet near the window, a family near the elevator bank with small children who kept pressing the button and then watching the numbers change with the specific delight that small children bring to numbers that change. The music overhead was subtle enough that most people did not consciously hear it, and the light from the chandeliers fell across the marble floor in patterns that looked almost designed. It was the kind of place that made a person feel they had arrived somewhere, and Calvin Boateng had always loved that feeling more than almost anything else. He stood at the front desk in a charcoal blazer that he had chosen because it made his shoulders look a certain way, one hand resting on the counter with the easy weight of a man who expected counters to hold themselves still for him. His other hand rested at the small of Tanya's back, not gently, not privately, but with a deliberate visibility, the kind of touch that is performed as much as felt. Tanya Reeves wore a cream dress that ended just above the knee. She had selected it that afternoon with the same attention a person gives to a decision that will be observed. Her posture was the posture of a woman who had decided that this lobby was her lobby, that this evening was her evening, that the space beside Calvin Boateng was a space she had earned and intended to hold. Her chin was slightly elevated. Her eyes moved across the lobby slowly, the particular movement of eyes that want to be seen moving. And when they passed over the other guests, they carried the faint quality of assessment, the sizing up of a woman who has spent time being underestimated and has confused the resentment of that experience with authority. Rochelle stood 2 feet to Calvin's left. She had traveled in charcoal slacks and a fitted ivory blazer, her natural hair pinned back with the clean simplicity of a woman who does not use her appearance as a performance. She carried a structured handbag in dark leather over one shoulder. She was not dressed for a fight. She was not dressed to impress. She was dressed like a woman who had somewhere specific to be and had already decided, in private and at considerable length, exactly how she was going to get there. The young woman behind the front desk, her name tag read Brianna, had looked up from her screen with the bright, automatic smile of someone who greets 40 check-ins on a Friday night and has learned to make each one feel like the first. The smile had already begun to change, not disappear, but shift. The muscles around it were no longer doing the same work. Calvin said it with volume, not shouting, but carrying, the voice of a man who wanted to be heard, who in fact needed to be heard, because the cruelty of what he was doing required witnesses in order to mean anything at all. He pointed at Rochelle and told Brianna that she was the housekeeper and would need to use the service entrance. The couple behind them in line heard it. The businessman near the window, who had looked up for an unrelated reason, heard it. Brianna heard it, and her smile completed its change into something that was no longer a smile. Tanya's lips curved. It was a specific kind of smile, the smile of a person who has been anticipating a moment and has now arrived at it. She tilted her head slightly toward Calvin, a small, contained movement of satisfaction, and did not look at Rochelle directly. She did not need to. The not looking was its own message. She lifted 2 fingers and touched Calvin's arm, light and possessive, the gesture of a woman reminding the room of a relationship. She said in a voice just under conversational, just loud enough to carry to the couple behind them, and to Brianna, and to the businessman who had stopped pretending to look at his tablet. "Baby, I told you she would follow us here. She just cannot let go." The lobby absorbed this. The family near the elevator went quiet. One of the small children pressed the button, and nobody reacted. Rochelle did not move. Her right hand was flat on the marble counter, fingers relaxed, not gripping. Her nails were clean. Her left hand held the sealed envelope, white, square, sealed with the careful pressure of someone who had considered what the sealing meant. The envelope was pressed against her side without tightness, carried the way a person carries something that has been prepared and does not require worry because the preparation is already complete. She looked at Calvin with a particular expression, not anger and not grief, and not the performed dignity of a woman trying to appear unaffected. She looked at him the way a woman looks at a mistake she has already counted and filed and accounted for in every relevant column, with a stillness that was more unsettling to anyone paying attention than any other emotion she could have shown. Brianna's hand moved toward a different drawer, the one with the key cards for the service corridor, the staff passages, the entrances meant for people whose role in the building was to clean what others dirtied. Rochelle spoke. She did not raise her voice. She said one word, directed at Brianna, not at Calvin, not at Tanya, not at the lobby. "Don't." Brianna's hand stopped as though it had received a separate instruction from a higher source. The lobby was doing that particular thing lobbies do when something real begins to happen inside them. The ambient sounds continued, the soft music overhead, the elevator chime, the gentle percussion of luggage wheels on marble. But the human attention in the room had adjusted, the way a group of people adjust without speaking when they collectively sense that the performance has ended and the actual event has begun. The couple behind Calvin had stopped moving. 2 guests near the seating arrangement had leaned, slightly, without appearing to lean. Brianna's eyes did not go to Calvin. They did not go to Tanya. They went past Rochelle, past all of them, toward the door in the wall behind the front desk, a door that, if you did not know to look for it, was almost invisible. It was the look of a young woman checking where the larger authority was and whether it was paying attention. Calvin was still smiling when that door opened. He would not be smiling for long. There are marriages that begin as love stories and become something else so gradually that the people inside them often cannot identify the moment of change. Only the fact of it when they finally stop to look. The change comes the way a photograph fades. Not all at once, not in one dramatic exposure, but image by image, color by color, until the day you hold it to the light and realize you can barely recognize the faces. Rochelle and Calvin Boateng had met 12 years ago at a Sunday afternoon gathering, hosted by their church in the southwest Atlanta neighborhood where Calvin had grown up and where Rochelle had moved for graduate school. She was completing her final year of a business degree at a university that had admitted her on partial scholarship because Her academic record had made the decision straightforward. She was 26. She was careful with money and generous with time. She cooked well and laughed easily, and had the kind of intellectual precision that sometimes made people around her slightly uncomfortable because it was quieter than they expected and more consistent than they could match. Calvin was 29. He was managing a small logistics company, 4 trucks, 2 warehouses, and the specific, combustible confidence of a man who is one good contract away from becoming something real and who has structured his entire sense of self around that proximity. He had a warmth that was genuine and a charm that was partly genuine and partly learned, and at 29, he had not yet learned the difference, or perhaps had not yet needed to. He brought flowers on the 3rd date. He asked about her father on the 4th. He introduced her to his mother on the 5th, and his mother was guarded, but not unkind, and Calvin seemed proud in the way that men are proud when they believe they have done something well. They were married 14 months after the church gathering in a garden ceremony with 112 guests, and in the photographs from that afternoon, they are both genuinely laughing, their hands interlocked, their faces turned toward each other with the unselfconscious joy of people who believe they are at a beginning. Rochelle's father, Gerald, had helped Calvin more than Calvin had ever said out loud in any room where it could be counted. He had co-signed the equipment loan that expanded the logistics fleet from 4 trucks to 11. He had made 3 specific phone calls to business contacts: a distribution manager he had known for 20 years, a city contracts officer he had coached in youth league baseball, a property developer who owed Gerald a favor from a deal in 2009, and those calls had translated over the following 18 months into Calvin's first 3 major contracts. Gerald had done all of this quietly in the background, the way fathers do things for daughters they love without making the love conditional on acknowledgement. He had never asked to be thanked. He had never been thanked. And Calvin had told the story of his business success at every dinner and industry event and occasion that called for it, as a story of his own vision, his own risk, his own refusal to accept the limits other people accepted. For 7 years, the marriage was uneven in the particular way that certain marriages are, not broken, not defined by conflict, but tilted, like a table with one leg slightly shorter than the others. You learn to set your cup at a certain angle. You stop noticing the tilt because you have made all the small adjustments without being aware you are making them. Rochelle managed the household finances. She organized the annual tax filings. She handled insurance renewals and the quarterly estimates for the business during the 3-month stretch when Calvin's accountant was between assistants and Calvin had not yet found time to replace him. She maintained a contact list of Calvin's clients that included their spouses' names, their children's names, their children's ages, and the last conversation topic she had spoken to each of them about at the previous event. She hosted dinner 4 or 5 times a year for Calvin's business relationships, and she cooked the meals herself, and she sent the follow-up messages the next morning. She did all of this without complaint and without ledger, because she had been raised to believe that love was something you showed through continued, unglamorous action. That the daily work of a life together was not a sacrifice, but an expression. Calvin accepted all of it as something he was owed. The first signal came 2 years before the lobby. It was not dramatic. It was the absence of a small thing Calvin had always done. And the absence of small things is the kind of signal that a person has to be paying careful attention to notice at all. Calvin had always come home for dinner. Not every night, but consistently. It had been one of the unspoken structures of the marriage, a gravity they returned to. Then there were weeks when he did not. Then there was the phone, which had always lived on the kitchen table during evenings at home, and which now lived in his pocket, screen against his leg, angled away. The industry dinners began. He described them as necessary, expansions of the business's social reach, the kind of environments where relationships that turned into contracts were built. He said the company he kept at these events was not her scene, and when she asked him once, carefully, whether she might attend one, he had looked at her with an expression she could not quite name, not dismissive, not unkind, but carrying a quality of having already settled a question that she did not know was being asked. And he said, "You wouldn't enjoy it, Rock." She had not asked a second time. She had filed the expression somewhere inside herself and said nothing. The hotel reward statement arrived on a Tuesday with the rest of the mail. It was from the Harrington Grand, and it showed 2 weekend stays in the previous 4 months. She and Calvin had not stayed at the Harrington Grand. They had not stayed anywhere together in the previous 4 months. She read the statement standing at the kitchen counter, holding the rest of the mail in her other hand. She set the rest of the mail down. She found the loyalty card 3 weeks later in the inside pocket of Calvin's sport jacket while she was preparing it for the dry cleaner. Cream-colored cardstock, the Harrington Grand emblem in gold on the front, a member number on the back. She stood in the kitchen holding it and felt the particular quality of confirmation, not surprise, which had already passed, but the settling weight of a thing becoming undeniable. She was in the kitchen for 6 minutes, looking at the card before she made a decision about it. She put it in the bottom of her jewelry box, beneath a tray of earrings she rarely wore, and she said nothing. Claudette Boateng had always had a quality of warmth that arrived with conditions she did not name directly. She was Calvin's older sister by 3 years, and she had treated Rochelle, across the 12 years of the marriage, with the particular difficulty of a woman who has decided that her brother belongs to her in a way that predates and outranks the claim of any wife. Not open hostility, not cruelty, but a warmth that was never quite full, a welcome that always carried a faint reservation, a way of including Rochelle in conversations that also managed to leave her slightly outside them. Over the previous year and a half, the calls had increased. Claudette called Calvin in the evenings with new frequency, and the calls ended quickly when Rochelle entered the room. Calvin's voice dropping to a low register, the phone shifting in his hand, his body turning a few degrees. Rochelle noticed this pattern the way she noticed all patterns, without reacting, without naming it out loud, filing it somewhere inside herself in the section she kept for things that were accumulating. Some women cry when they first see the truth. Rochelle took notes. It was a Thursday night in March, 11:30, when Rochelle found the second phone. Calvin was in Dallas, or described himself as being in Dallas, for what he had called a supply chain conference. Rochelle had gone into his home office to find a charger. Hers had stopped holding a connection, and she knew Calvin kept spares in his desk drawer. The charger was not in the desk drawer. What was in the desk drawer, beneath a manila folder that contained nothing of substance, was a second phone. It was a basic model, black, the kind purchased without a contract at a chain electronics store, the kind with no particular brand loyalty and no particular reason to exist unless there was a particular reason for it to exist. It was not locked. The messages stretched back 14 months. The contact was listed as T, nothing more, and the messages filled the screen in a long, continuous scroll, the intimacy of them unambiguous, the volume of them staggering, the casualness of them perhaps the most damaging detail of all, because carelessness of that degree requires a specific kind of contempt for the possibility of being caught. There were hotel bookings in the messages, weekend plans, inside references to conversations and meals and rooms Rochelle had never been part of. There were photographs. There was a photograph from a hotel room she recognized immediately. The particular angle of the window, the way the curtains gathered at the base, a detail in the ceiling light fixture she had noticed once when she and Calvin had stayed there 3 years ago. The Harrington Grand. Tanya had sent the photograph with the caption, "Our place." Calvin had replied with a heart. He had never, in 14 months of messages, used one word in Rochelle's defense. Tanya had referred to her as that housekeeping woman you're stuck with, and Calvin had laughed, replied with an emoji, kept the thread going. He had referred to the marriage as the situation twice, once as dead weight. The accumulation of this, read in sequence on a phone that smelled faintly of another person's cologne, had a specific and terrible weight to it. Not just the betrayal itself, but the portrait it constructed. A man who had looked at the woman who had built his life beside him and had found, in private, that she was nothing more than an inconvenience he had not yet gotten around to addressing. Rochelle did not cry. She photographed every screen methodically, every thread, every date, moving through the messages with the focused steadiness of a person completing a task that requires precision. When she was finished, she replaced the phone under the folder in exactly the position she had found it, and she walked out of the office and closed the door quietly behind her. She went to the kitchen. She filled the kettle and set it on the stove and stood at the window while the water heated, looking at the street below. An ordinary neighborhood at ordinary midnight, a porch light across the way, a car passing slowly, someone's dog at the edge of a yard before being called back. The ordinary world continuing exactly as it had been. She made tea. She sat down at the kitchen table with her hands around the cup, and she felt the quiet of the house pressing in from all sides, the specific quiet of a space that contains 12 years of shared life, and now also contains the knowledge that half of those 12 years were a performance. She opened her laptop. She began to type. The second wound arrived 3 days later from a direction she had suspected but had not confirmed. She asked Claudette to meet for coffee without explaining why, and Claudette agreed with the particular brightness of a woman who has something to feel guilty about and has decided that agreeableness is its own kind of protection. They met at a small place near Claudette's neighborhood, and when Rochelle sat down across from her, she watched Claudette arrange herself. Her cup, her phone face down, her bag placed precisely, with the visible energy of a woman performing comfort she was not feeling. Rochelle waited until the coffee arrived. Then she asked, simply and directly, looking at Claudette without blinking, how long had she known about Tanya? Claudette's face changed in the way that faces change when a question removes every available exit simultaneously. The change lasted only a second before the recovery began, the face settling into a new arrangement, the words starting slowly and then coming faster, moving through defensiveness and then minimization, and then a brief, circling pass at something resembling apology before landing, finally, on justification. She had been protecting her brother. She had not felt it was her place to involve herself in his private affairs. She had not wanted to cause pain. She had thought it would resolve on its own. Rochelle listened to every word. She let Claudette finish entirely. She did not interrupt once. Then she picked up her bag, left her coffee untouched, and walked out of the coffee shop without saying a word in response. She had already seen the message on the second phone. Claudette's number, 11 months earlier. She'll never figure it out. Just keep her busy with the house stuff. That's all she's good for anyway. Calvin had replied with a single thumbs-up emoji, casual as a weather update. Betrayal from a husband wounds the heart. Betrayal from a woman who had sat at her Thanksgiving table for 12 years, who had accepted her hospitality and her cooking and her careful effort at family, that wounded something deeper in a part of Rochelle that did not have a clean name. She sat with that wound for 2 days. She did not perform her processing. She did not call anyone. She simply felt the full weight of it in private, and then she set it down, and she went back to the laptop, and she continued building. Adrienne Shaw's law office occupied the 6th floor of a building downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows on the east side that filled the space with morning light. And Adrienne Shaw herself was the kind of attorney who made you feel, from the moment you sat down across from her, that every document you had ever signed in your life had been recorded somewhere, and she had already read it. She was precise in the way that people are precise when their precision has been practiced long enough to become effortless, and she had the quality of someone who has heard a great many terrible things and has not allowed any of them to make her cruel. Rochelle arrived on a Tuesday morning. She placed a folder on the desk, 2 inches thick, organized by category, each section separated by a labeled tab. Photographs of the phone messages, the hotel rewards statements, the loyalty card from the Harrington Grand, cream-colored with the gold emblem, 3 years of joint business account records with the irregular transfers highlighted in yellow, each one dated, each one traced to the receiving account. A printed timeline she had constructed herself at the kitchen table across 2 nights, annotating every financial movement against the hotel booking records and the message dates so that the pattern was visible at a glance to anyone who looked. Adrienne Shaw looked at the folder for a long moment. Then she looked at Rochelle. "Most of my clients come in crying," she said. Rochelle said, "I cried already. That part is done." The financial picture was specific and damaging. Calvin had been moving money from the joint business account, the logistics company that her father had helped build through 3 phone calls and a co-signed loan, the company that bore Calvin's name alone because Rochelle had trusted that marriage made ownership irrelevant, into a private account she had not known existed. The transfers were not enormous individually. They were consistent. They spanned 14 months. The pattern matched the messages precisely enough that the correspondence was not coincidental. What Calvin had not considered, because Calvin had not, in the years of Rochelle's invisible labor, ever considered the specific documents she had signed, or the precise legal standing those documents created, was that the joint business account had a co-ownership structure from the original incorporation that Rochelle had signed, and that gave her equal standing in the entity. He had assumed she had either forgotten or never understood it. He had been wrong on both counts. Adrienne noted this. She made a small mark in her own folder and said they would need to move carefully and quickly, and she outlined the steps. Rochelle nodded at each one. She asked 2 clarifying questions. She was not afraid. She had already been through the fear in private at a kitchen table at midnight, and she had come out the other side of it into something harder and quieter and more useful. She made 1 call from the car on her way home. Derek Osei answered on the 2nd ring. They had grown up 2 blocks from each other in the same Southwest Atlanta neighborhood, attended the same church, graduated the same year from the same high school. They had remained friends across the 20 years since. Not the kind of friends who spoke every week, but the kind of friends who could call after 8 months of silence and be immediately, completely themselves with each other, because the friendship was built on something that did not require maintenance to survive. Derek had spent 15 years in hospitality management and had been the general manager of the Harrington Grand for 4 of them. He managed the property with the same quality of quiet precision that Rochelle recognized in herself, and the hotel reflected it. The clean floors, the cedar scent, the way the staff moved. She said, "Derek, I need to ask you something, and I need you to say yes." There was a pause on the line, not of hesitation, but of attention, the pause of a person who is listening with their full mind. Then he said, "Okay, Rock, tell me." The call lasted 11 minutes. She did not tell him everything. She told him enough. She told him about the loyalty card, about the account, about the reservation she expected Calvin would make at the Harrington Grand, and when and why it would be made on a specific joint account that Adrian Shaw's office intended to flag through a business account monitoring request. She told him what she needed him to do when it happened, and where she needed him to be. He said yes. One afternoon that week, she drove to the Harrington Grand alone. She entered through the main lobby entrance, walked through the cedar-scented air, past the front desk, past the seating arrangement, past the 2 men with the tablet. She knew where Derek's office was, behind the front desk wall, the door almost flush with the surface, designed to be invisible unless you knew the exact seam to look for. She stood in the lobby for a few minutes. She noted the counter where she would stand when the time came. She noted the placement of the service corridor keycard drawer. She noted where Brianna, or someone like her, would be positioned. Then she walked out. That evening, she prepared the envelope. She assembled the documents in order, the financial transfer records at the back, the hotel receipts in the middle, the divorce papers immediately accessible, and the loyalty card paper-clipped to the top of the stack with her own handwritten annotation of every itemized stay on its reverse. She sealed the envelope with steady hands. She wrote nothing on the outside. She put it in her bag and did not take it out again. Calvin booked the Harrington Grand Suite 4 days later, on a Wednesday, from the joint account, without covering the transaction in any way, because Calvin had been doing this long enough that he had stopped believing coverage was necessary. The booking generated an automatic alert through the monitoring request Adrian Shaw had filed. The alert went to Adrian's office and, as a business client of Boateng Logistics, a copy of the relevant financial disclosure documentation went to the Harrington Grand's management office as part of the formal process Adrian had arranged. Derek called Rochelle that evening. He said simply, "Friday." She said, "I know." Calvin booked the suite, thinking he was treating himself to a weekend he had earned. He didn't know the reservation had already been noted. The door behind the front desk wall opened slowly. Derek Osei filled the doorframe with a presence that did not require announcement. Tall and composed in a dark suit with the hotel crest on the lapel. A man who moved through spaces the way people move through spaces when they are entirely certain of their authority within them. He stepped into the lobby without rushing. He did not look at Calvin first. He looked at Rochelle. He gave one small, deliberate nod. The nod of a person confirming to another person that they are exactly where they said they would be. Brianna stepped back from the counter in the same motion, as if Derek's arrival had resolved a question she had been holding. Calvin produced a laugh, the short, social variety, the kind men issue when they want to communicate that a situation is routine and beneath their concern. He turned toward Derek with his shoulders set in the posture of a man who assumed other men extended him deference as a starting position. "Hey, we just need to check in. Suite reservation under Boateng." Derek looked at him. His expression gave away nothing in either direction. Not hostility, not warmth, nothing that Calvin could read as an invitation to negotiate. "Mr. Boateng." A pause, timed with precision. I'm aware of your reservation. Another pause. I'm also aware of several other things. The lobby had not gone silent. It had gone still, which is a different quality. A stillness in which sound continues, but human attention has migrated. The way attention migrates in a room when the thing that was ambient suddenly requires interpretation. The couple behind Calvin in the check-in line had stopped moving entirely. The two men who had been at the seating arrangement with the tablet were both looking in the direction of the front desk. The front desk clerk at the adjacent computer had stepped half a pace to the side, as if creating distance from something he could feel, but not yet see. Tanya's smirk left her face. It did not depart dramatically. It simply receded, the way warmth recedes from a surface when the source is removed, gradually, and then completely. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, an unconscious adjustment, and her hand, which had been resting with possession on Calvin's arm, withdrew to her own side. Calvin looked at Rochelle. It was the first time since they had entered the Harrington Grand that he had looked at her with any attention, and what he saw was not what he had expected to see. Her posture had not changed. Her expression had not changed. She was looking at Brianna and asking, in a voice entirely free of urgency or performance, whether it might be possible to have a glass of water. Brianna said yes immediately, turning to the small station behind the desk, and Rochelle said, "Thank you," with the same tone. Something moved behind Calvin's eyes. It moved quickly and without resolution. Not guilt. Guilt comes later, when there is enough space to feel something beyond the immediate. Not fear yet. The first early question. Why isn't she afraid? It was a question that implied its own answer, if he had been willing to follow it, but he was not yet willing, and so he stood with it unresolved, looking at his wife holding a glass of water with the same steady hands she had arrived with. The room hadn't changed. The lighting hadn't changed. But something had shifted, and everyone in that lobby felt it. Everyone except Calvin. Derek spoke in the register he used for all things in the Harrington Grand, a voice trained to carry across a lobby without being raised, a voice that communicated through its evenness that whatever was being said had been thought through before being said and did not require repetition. He addressed Calvin directly. He did not look away. He explained that the suite reservation had been flagged through a routine financial review. The joint account used to book the suite was linked to a business entity, Boateng Logistics, whose account activity had been under monitoring at the request of legal counsel, acting on behalf of a co-owner of the entity. That monitoring was legal, standard, and had been in place for several weeks. The charge for the suite reservation was not, in itself, the triggering concern. The pattern of charges from that account over the prior 14 months was the concern. The Harrington Grand, as a business client of Boateng Logistics, had received a formal financial disclosure package related to that pattern as part of the legal process underway, a disclosure that was entirely within the standard protocols of such a proceeding. Calvin's face moved through its sequence of changes with a speed that was almost systematic. The first change, the recognition that something is wrong. The second, the recognition that the wrongness is substantial. The third, the recognition that the wrongness was prepared, that it did not arrive today, that its architecture was built before today and has been waiting for today. The fourth, the recognition that the preparation was not his. He said, "What documentation?" His voice had flattened. The social layer of it had disappeared, and what was underneath was harder and smaller, and already beginning to understand how little it had to work with. Derek turned to Rochelle. He said, "Mrs. Boateng, would you like to proceed?" Rochelle set her glass down on the counter with the quiet precision of a person who does not fumble things. She reached into her bag. She removed the sealed envelope, white, square, the same envelope that had been in her hand when she walked into the lobby, the envelope Calvin had seen and registered and dismissed because he had decided without examination that it was nothing that concerned him. She broke the seal in one motion, clean, deliberate, the sound of it audible in the stillness of the lobby. She reached inside. She removed the documents. They were not only divorce papers, though the divorce papers were present, the official filings with Adrian Shaw's signature, and the case number and the date. Beneath them were the financial transfer records, 14 months, each transfer dated to the day, each amount specific, each destination account named and traced. Beneath those were the hotel receipts, organized chronologically, and paper-clipped to the top of the entire stack, positioned so that it was the first thing visible, was the cream-colored loyalty card from the Harrington Grand. Calvin's member number on the front. On the back, in Rochelle's handwriting, every stay itemized, each weekend dated, each room category noted. 12 separate visits over 14 months that the rewards account had recorded, because rewards accounts record everything. She had found that card in the inside pocket of his jacket months ago, on a Tuesday afternoon when she was preparing it for the cleaners, and she had held it in her kitchen for 6 minutes, and she had put it in her jewelry box under a tray of earrings she never wore, and she had said nothing, and she had waited. She placed the entire stack on the marble counter. She did not throw it. She did not slam it. She set it down with the same quietness with which she had set down the water glass. The movement of someone laying down a finished thing, something complete, something that requires no further work from her. Calvin moved. His hand reached across the counter toward the documents. Rochelle placed her hand flat on top of the stack. Her palm came down over the loyalty card, over the financial records, over the 14 months of itemized proof. And she looked up at Calvin, and she held the look without blinking. It was the same look she had given him in the doorway of the lobby, the same look she had held in the photograph of them laughing on their wedding day, except opposite in every quality. Not the open face of a beginning, but the still face of an ending that has already been processed and filed. The lobby was entirely, completely silent. When she spoke, it was soft. The softness was not gentleness. It was the particular quality of a voice that does not need volume because everything in the room is already oriented toward it. She said, "You called me the housekeeper, Calvin." She did not look away from him. "But I built this house, every room of it." Tanya took a small step backward, a single step, involuntary. Derek turned his eyes toward her. One look, brief, carrying the full authority of a man on his own property. She stopped moving. Calvin's jaw tightened. His eyes dropped to the documents despite himself. The dates, the amounts, the loyalty card with its handwritten annotations, the divorce filing with its official stamps. His color changed. The blood retreated from certain surfaces of him, leaving behind a grayness that was not becoming. Rochelle spoke once more. She addressed Derek, but she did not redirect her gaze from her husband. She said that the financial disclosure package also documented communications from a third party who had actively assisted in concealing the account movements, who had provided Calvin with information about Rochelle's schedule and awareness in order to help him manage the concealment over the period in question. She did not say the name. She did not need to say the name. The name was already in the documentation. The name was already in Calvin's face, in the specific shade of gray it became when he understood what she was referring to, in the way his shoulders dropped a fraction in the particular posture of a man who has just understood that there is no version of this conversation in which he is not completely exposed. Two guests near the seating area had drifted several steps closer to the front desk without appearing to have done so intentionally. The elevator opened, and the family with the small children stepped out. One of the children pointed at something on the ceiling. Nobody else looked at the ceiling. The marble lobby of the Harrington Grand had seen 1,000 check-ins. It had never seen a woman check out of a marriage with that much grace. The board meeting for Boateng Logistics was scheduled for a Monday morning 8 days after the Harrington Grand. It had been called with the formal language of a meeting that has been arranged by people who have already decided what will occur in it. The notice sent with 2 fewer days than standard, the agenda spare and precise, the location the small conference room rather than the main one. Calvin arrived in the charcoal blazer. He sat at the head of the table from habit, and because no one had told him not to. 3 of the 5 board members, 2 of whom had received the financial disclosure package from Adrian Shaw's office and had had 11 days to review it, did not sit down. They stood near the window and spoke with the measured, formal register of people who have done something difficult before and understand that formality is a form of mercy. The words fiduciary responsibility appeared. The phrase material misappropriation appeared. The phrase operational authority suspended pending investigation appeared with finality, and when it landed on the table between them, the room held it for a moment before anyone spoke again. Calvin said several things during that meeting. None of them mattered to the outcome, because the outcome had been arranged before anyone sat down, and the people arranging it had access to the same documents Adrian Shaw had filed, and those documents were specific. The withdrawal of his professional network happened in the way that such withdrawals always happen. Not all at once, not with announcement, but through accumulation. The industry dinners stopped sending invitations. The first one he noticed, the second one confirmed it. After the third, he stopped checking. 2 vendors he had worked with for 6 years found reasons: supply chain realignments, internal restructuring, timing that didn't suit the current quarter, to renegotiate or delay. A man Calvin had called a friend for 15 years, a man he had attended 3 weddings with and stood beside at one of them, did not return the first phone call, or the second, or the third, and on the 4th attempt sent a text message that said he was tied up for the foreseeable future and would reach out when things opened up. Things did not open up. Tanya Reeves checked out of the Harrington Grand on a Saturday morning, alone, with 2 pieces of luggage that she moved through the lobby with the purposeful efficiency of a woman who has recalibrated her priorities and found that this particular location no longer serves them. There was no suite. The suite reservation had been canceled through the financial monitoring process, the joint account flagged, the charge reversed. There was no Calvin in the charcoal blazer to hold a door, or rest a hand on her back, or perform the rituals of arrival that had made the lobby feel, the previous week, like a stage she was performing on. Brianna was at the front desk when Tanya left. Brianna did not look up from her screen. Claudette's number appeared on Rochelle's phone twice in the week following the Harrington Grand, then again on a Thursday. On Saturday, a long text message arrived. Rochelle read it once, standing in the kitchen, the morning sun coming through the window above the sink. The message moved through apology and self-justification in the way of messages from people who are sorrier about their consequences than their actions. And it ended with a request to speak, to be given the opportunity to explain, to be extended the grace that family extends to family. Rochelle set the phone down on the counter and looked out the window for a moment. Then she went and made coffee. She did not reply. She had nothing left to say to Claudette. The decision was not made in anger. Anger would have required ongoing investment in Claudette's significance, and Rochelle had closed that account. The decision was made in the calm arithmetic of a woman who had measured the relationship honestly against the evidence and arrived at a number. Calvin came to the house on a Wednesday evening. He drove up after 7 when the light was going, and Adrienne Shaw's car was already in the driveway. He parked at the angle of someone who had arrived before him and intended to still be there when he left. Rochelle had known he would come, and she had asked Adrienne to be present, and Adrienne had arrived at 6:30 with a legal pad and 2 pens. Calvin sat in his car for a few minutes. The front porch light came on automatically as the evening deepened. He looked at the house, his house, or the house that bore his name, or the house that Rochelle had organized and maintained and made functional for 12 years, and he sat with whatever he was sitting with. Then he put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway and drove away. He hadn't lost everything because of Rochelle. He had lost everything because of Calvin. She just stopped standing in the way of it. 6 months later, the sun came through the east-facing windows of the second-floor office on Peachtree Drive at that specific morning angle, the golden hour angle that makes the dust in the air visible and makes the light itself look like something with physical weight. The office was not large. It had been selected because of the windows and the location, and because the rent was manageable for the first year of a new venture if the venture was planned carefully, which Rochelle had. 2 rooms and a reception area, and a glass door at the entrance to the corridor. And on that glass door, in clean block letters that she had chosen herself from a catalog of fonts and had looked at for a long time before deciding, Rochelle Boateng, Business Advisors. She sat at her desk with a cup of tea that had cooled to the temperature she preferred. She did not like tea at the temperature it was poured, only at the temperature it arrived at if you left it alone for 11 minutes, a preference she had maintained since graduate school. The morning was quiet in the particular way she had been learning over these 6 months to value, not the quiet of a house where something was absent, where the absence was itself a presence, but the quiet of a space that was entirely and only what it was meant to be. On the desk beside her keyboard, a framed photograph. Her and Derek at the signing of her business license. Both of them mid-laugh, her right hand in the air, the way you raise a hand when something has just struck you as genuinely funny. His head tilted back with the full, uncomplicated laughter of a person who is happy about something and not managing how happy he appears to be. 2 people from the same block in southwest Atlanta who had taken very different roads and arrived, somehow, at the same intersection at a moment when it mattered. Her phone buzzed on the desk, face down, the vibration moving across the wood. She turned it over. The message was from Adrienne Shaw. It read, "Final divorce settlement approved and filed. Effective as of this morning." She read it once. She set the phone face down again. She looked out the window at Peachtree Drive, the mid-morning traffic, a woman crossing at the corner with a coffee and a bag, a delivery truck double-parked 2 businesses down, a man on a bicycle navigating the gap. The ordinary world in its ordinary motion, entirely indifferent to what had just been finalized, and beautiful for it. She picked up her tea. She exhaled, long even, the kind of breath a person takes when they have been carrying something at a certain altitude for a long time and have finally found a place to set it down. On the far corner of her desk, not hidden, not displayed prominently, just resting there the way an ordinary object rests when it belongs to a space. the cream-colored Harrington Grand loyalty card. Calvin's member number on the front, her handwriting on the back. She had not thrown it away in all these months, and she had considered, more than once, whether keeping it was a form of wound tending she should examine. She had concluded that it was not. It was not a wound anymore. It was a coordinate, the marker of a night that had changed the geography of her life, and she kept it the way a navigator keeps a chart of waters already crossed, not to return, but to remember that she had found her way through. She did not see Calvin when he drove past. He came down Peachtree Drive sometime around 9:30 on his way to whatever the day held for him now, the charcoal blazer no longer carrying quite the same authority it had once carried, and he slowed when the lettering on the glass door of the second floor resolved into something readable from the street. Her name, clean block letters, his wife's name, his former wife's name, on the door of a business that had not existed 6 months ago and that was, by any measure he could apply, exactly what it appeared to be. He sat with it for a moment from behind the windshield. Whatever moved across his face in that moment was seen only by the empty passenger seat. Then he drove on. The name was already in the documentation. The name was already in Calvin's face, in the specific shade of gray it became when he understood what she was referring to, in the way his shoulders dropped a fraction in the particular posture of a man who has just understood that there is no version of this conversation in which he is not completely exposed. 2 guests near the seating area had drifted several steps closer to the front desk without appearing to have done so intentionally. The elevator opened, and the family with the small children stepped out. One of the children pointed at something on the ceiling. Nobody else looked at the ceiling. The marble lobby of the Harrington Grand had seen 1,000 check-ins. It had never seen a woman check out of a marriage with that much grace. The board meeting for Boateng Logistics was scheduled for a Monday morning 8 days after the Harrington Grand. It had been called with the formal language of a meeting that has been arranged by people who have already decided what will occur in it. The notice sent with 2 fewer days than standard, the agenda spare and precise, the location the small conference room rather than the main one. Calvin arrived in the charcoal blazer. He sat at the head of the table from habit, and because no one had told him not to. 3 of the 5 board members, 2 of whom had received the financial disclosure package from Adrian Shaw's office and had had 11 days to review it, did not sit down. They stood near the window and spoke with the measured, formal register of people who have done something difficult before and understand that formality is a form of mercy. The words fiduciary responsibility appeared. The phrase material misappropriation appeared. The phrase operational authority suspended pending investigation appeared with finality, and when it landed on the table between them, the room held it for a moment before anyone spoke again. Calvin said several things during that meeting. None of them mattered to the outcome, because the outcome had been arranged before anyone sat down, and the people arranging it had access to the same documents Adrian Shaw had filed, and those documents were specific. The withdrawal of his professional network happened in the way that such withdrawals always happen, not all at once, not with announcement, but through accumulation. The industry dinners stopped sending invitations. The first one he noticed, the second one confirmed it. After the third, he stopped checking. 2 vendors he had worked with for 6 years found reasons: supply chain realignments, internal restructuring, timing that didn't suit the current quarter, to renegotiate or delay. A man Calvin had called a friend for 15 years, a man he had attended 3 weddings with and stood beside at one of them, did not return the first phone call, or the second, or the third, and on the 4th attempt sent a text message that said he was tied up for the foreseeable future and would reach out when things opened up. Things did not open up. Tanya Reeves checked out of the Harrington Grand on a Saturday morning, alone, with 2 pieces of luggage that she moved through the lobby with the purposeful efficiency of a woman who has recalibrated her priorities and found that this particular location no longer serves them. There was no suite. The suite reservation had been canceled through the financial monitoring process, the joint account flagged, the charge reversed. There was no Calvin in the charcoal blazer to hold a door or rest a hand on her back or perform the rituals of arrival that had made the lobby feel, the previous week, like a stage she was performing on. Brianna was at the front desk when Tanya left. Brianna did not look up from her screen. Claudette's number appeared on Rochelle's phone twice in the week following the Harrington Grand, then again on a Thursday. On Saturday, a long text message arrived. Rochelle read it once, standing in the kitchen, the morning sun coming through the window above the sink. The message moved through apology and self-justification in the way of messages from people who are sorrier about their consequences than their actions. And it ended with a request to speak, to be given the opportunity to explain, to be extended the grace that family extends to family. Rochelle set the phone down on the counter and looked out the window for a moment. Then she went and made coffee. She did not reply. She had nothing left to say to Claudette. The decision was not made in anger. Anger would have required ongoing investment in Claudette's significance, and Rochelle had closed that account. The decision was made in the calm arithmetic of a woman who had measured the relationship honestly against the evidence and arrived at a number. Calvin came to the house on a Wednesday evening. He drove up after 7 when the light was going, and Adrienne Shaw's car was already in the driveway.